Welcome to our insightful and impressive story today. Millionaire publicly humiliates pregnant wife for new lover. 3 years later, he is really shocked. In this gripping and emotional story, we delve into the life of a wealthy millionaire whose actions take an unexpected turn. Watch as he publicly humiliates his pregnant wife, casting her aside for a new lover. In a moment of sheer arrogance, he believes he has found happiness, but life has its own way of teaching lessons. 3 years pass, and the millionaire's world is about to be turned upside down. The decisions he made come back to haunt him in ways he never imagined. As he revels in his newfound relationship, a shocking revelation awaits him. The tale unfolds with twists and turns that challenge the notion of love, loyalty, and true happiness. Explore the emotional journey of a woman scorned who rises from the ashes of heartbreak. Her strength and resilience are put to the test as she navigates the challenges of single motherhood. Her story is one of empowerment and determination, proving that true strength lies within. Witness the millionaire's downfall as he confronts the consequences of his actions. The allure of wealth and luxury is overshadowed by the emptiness of betrayal. His journey is a powerful reminder that material possessions cannot replace genuine connections and that the heart cannot be bought. Inform us if you are enthusiastic about this narrative. If you are, press 1 if you found the video to be enjoyable. If this is not the case, press 0. Your comments are a great source of motivation for me to collect more stories that are uplifting and meaningful.
The morning sun reflected off the skyscraper's windows, creating a nearly blinding glare. On the 50th floor, Jack Hawkins watched the city stretch out below, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. His empire of glass and steel was a testament to his meteoric rise. "Mr. Hawkins, your next meeting begins in 5 minutes," announced his assistant over the intercom. "Thank you, Sarah. I'll be there in a moment," Jack replied, adjusting his silk tie. As he headed to the conference room, flashes of memory invaded his mind. Jack saw himself again as an ambitious young man, fresh out of college, determined to conquer Wall Street. "You won't last a week here, kid," a senior colleague scoffed. Jack clenched his fists, remembering the anger and determination those words had provoked. "Look at me now," he murmured to himself, a cold gleam in his eyes. Miles away, in a luxurious apartment overlooking Central Park, Hannah Hawkins prepared to leave. Her hands trembled slightly as she applied her lipstick. "You can do this, Hannah," she told her reflection in the mirror. "It's just lunch with your husband." But it wasn't just lunch, and she knew it. Hannah touched her still flat belly, where a secret was growing that could change everything. "How am I going to tell him?" she whispered, anxiety tightening her chest. Back at the office, Jack closed another multi-million-dollar deal. "Congratulations, Jack," one of the executives said, shaking his hand. "You've just added another jewel to your crown." Jack smiled, but the gleam didn't reach his eyes. "That's what we're here for, isn't it? To build empires." Meanwhile, Hannah entered the mall, her heart pounding. She looked at the shiny store windows, remembering how Jack used to surprise her with gifts in the early years of their marriage. "Miss Hannah," called a smiling saleswoman, "we have some new pieces that would suit you perfectly." Hannah forced a smile. "Thank you, but not today. I'm just waiting for my husband for lunch." The saleswoman nodded, understanding. Of course. Enjoy your lunch." Hannah walked to the restaurant, her hands unconsciously protecting her belly. She took a deep breath, gathering courage. "It's now or never," she murmured to herself, entering the establishment. The maitre d' greeted her with a smile. "Mrs. Hawkins, welcome. Your husband hasn't arrived yet, but your table is ready." Hannah nodded, following him. As she sat down, her mind wandered to the future. She imagined a baby in her arms, Jack's proud smile, a happy family. But a persistent voice in her head whispered doubts. Jack was always so busy, so focused on his empire. Would there be room for a baby in his life? Hannah checked her watch, nervous. Jack was late, as usual. She picked up the menu, more to have something to do with her hands than from real hunger. "You can do this," she repeated to herself. "You'll be a family. Everything will be okay." Little did she know that in a few minutes, her world would be turned upside down, and the glass empire Jack had built would begin to show its first cracks. Hannah tapped her fingers on the table, her gaze alternating between the restaurant entrance and the clock on her wrist. Jack was late, as usual. She sighed, trying to calm her nerves. Then she saw him, but not alone. Jack entered the mall, his imposing figure drawing glances. At his side, a stunning woman laughed at something he said, her hand casually resting on his arm. Hannah's blood froze in her veins. She recognized the woman immediately. Melissa, the new executive at Jack's company. "It can't be," she murmured, incredulous. Unable to contain herself, Hannah stood up and walked toward the entrance of the restaurant, her eyes fixed on the approaching couple. "Jack?" she called, her voice trembling slightly. Jack turned around. Surprise, and something else. Guilt, flashing across his face before being replaced by a mask of indifference. "Hannah?" he said coldly. "What are you doing here?" Melissa looked from one to the other, a malicious smile playing on her lips. "We had a lunch scheduled," Hannah replied, struggling to maintain her composure. "Don't you remember?" Jack shrugged. "Must have slipped my mind. I'm busy, as you can see." Hannah's heart tightened. "Jack, I need to talk to you. It's important. Now is not a good time." Jack cut her off, his voice as cold as ice. Melissa laughed, a sharp and cruel sound. "Oh dear, don't you understand? Jack has more important things to do than have lunch with a trophy wife." Hannah felt tears burn her eyes. "Jack, please." "Enough, Hannah!" Jack exploded, his voice echoing through the mall. "Can't you see you're embarrassing us? Go home. I don't have time for your dramas." The silence that followed was deafening. Passers-by stopped, aghast at the scene unfolding. Hannah felt as though she had been punched in the stomach. Her world was crumbling before her eyes. "How could you?" she whispered, the tears finally falling. Jack rolled his eyes, impatient. "Grow up, Hannah. This is how the real world works. Now, if you'll excuse us," he made to pass by her, Melissa still clinging to his arm, a triumphant smile on her face. It was too much for Hannah. With a strangled sob, she turned and ran, pushing people out of her way, desperate to escape that nightmare. "My God, did you see that?" whispered a woman to her friend. "Poor thing," another replied, casting a disdainful glance at Jack. A middle-aged man approached, clear indignation on his face. "Man, that's not done. Your wife deserves more respect." Jack ignored him, his cold eyes following the fleeing figure of Hannah for a moment before turning to Melissa. "Let's go," he said, leading her away from the crowd that was forming. Hannah ran, directionless, her tears blurring her vision. She bumped into people, tripped over her own feet but didn't stop. "Ma'am, are you all right?" a security guard asked, concerned. She just shook her head, unable to speak, and kept running. Finally, Hannah found herself outside the mall, the cold New York air hitting her tear-stained face. She stopped, panting, a hand instinctively resting on her belly. "Oh God," she sobbed. "What am I going to do now?" Inside the mall, people were still talking about the scene they had witnessed. "Did you see his face?" "Not a hint of remorse," said a teenager to her friends. "Men like him never change," replied an older woman, shaking her head sadly. Meanwhile, Jack and Melissa left the mall, seemingly oblivious to the turmoil they had caused. "Well, that was interesting," Melissa commented, a malicious smile on her lips. Jack shrugged, his face a mask of indifference. "She'll get over it. She always does." But as he climbed into his luxurious car, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered that this time, perhaps, he had gone too far. Hannah, alone on the busy New York sidewalk, hugged herself, feeling more lost and alone than ever. The dream of a happy family she had nurtured just a few hours earlier now lay in pieces at her feet. With one last look at the mall, she turned and began to walk, not knowing where she was going, but certain that she could not turn back. Hannah entered the apartment, closing the door behind her with a soft click. Silence enveloped her, punctuated only by the ticking of the clock on the wall. She slid to the floor, her back against the door, and finally let the sobs take over. Memories invaded her, relentless. She remembered 5 years ago. "Jack, where are we going?" Hannah laughed, her eyes blindfolded. "Patience, love," Jack replied, guiding her gently. "We're almost there." When he removed the blindfold, Hannah gasped. They were on top of the Empire State Building, the city of New York shimmering below them. "Hannah," Jack said, kneeling, "would you make me the happiest man in the world by marrying me?" The contrast between that memory and the current reality was too painful. Hannah slowly stood up, staggering to the bedroom. Her eyes landed on the wedding photo on the nightstand. Jack was looking at her with so much love in that picture. Where had that man gone? With trembling hands, Hannah opened the wardrobe and pulled out a suitcase. Each piece of clothing she placed inside felt like a piece of her heart being torn out. "I can't stay here anymore," she murmured to herself, the silent tears rolling down her face. She paused in front of the desk, picking up a pen and paper. The words flowed, a mix of pain, disappointment, and a twinge of hope for the uncertain future. "Jack, when we got married, I promised to stand by you in joy and in sorrow. But I never imagined that the sorrow would come from you. Today, I saw in your eyes that the man I fell in love with no longer exists. Perhaps he never really did. I can't continue living a lie. I'm leaving, taking with me not only my shattered hopes, but also a new life. Yes, Jack, I'm pregnant. Maybe one day you'll understand what you've lost. Until then, goodbye. Hannah." She folded the letter, leaving it on the perfectly made bed. With one last look at the apartment that once felt like home, Hannah picked up her suitcase and left. Hours later, Jack entered the apartment, loosening his tie. "Hannah?" he called, his voice echoing in the silence. Frowning, he walked through the rooms until he reached the bedroom. His eyes immediately noticed the letter on the bed. As he read, his face shifted from confusion to shock and finally to anger. He crumpled the paper, throwing it against the wall. "Damn it, Hannah!" he shouted to the empty room. "You can't just walk away like this." But she could, and she had. The sound of applause echoed through the luxurious hall. Jack Hawkins, impeccable in his Armani suit, smiled at the crowd of executives and celebrities that surrounded him. He had just closed the biggest deal of his career, consolidating his empire and his status as the King of Wall Street. "A toast to Jack Hawkins!" exclaimed the CEO of a rival company, raising his champagne glass. "The man who transformed the industry." Glasses clinked, and Jack drank, the bubbly liquid descending his throat. But the taste was bitter, and the smile on his face didn't reach his eyes. Hours later, Jack entered his penthouse apartment, loosening his tie. Melissa followed him, staggering slightly on her high heels. "What an incredible party, Jack!" she laughed, throwing herself on the leather sofa. "Did you see the faces of those fools when you announced the merger? Priceless." Jack just grunted in response, pouring himself a whiskey. Melissa frowned. "What's wrong? You just made history. You should be celebrating." "I'm tired, Melissa," Jack replied dryly. "Maybe you better go home." "Go home?" Melissa stood up, indignant. "I thought I was staying here tonight. After all, we should be celebrating, shouldn't we?" Jack stared at her, suddenly irritated by her presence. "Look, I really need to be alone right now. We can talk tomorrow." Melissa looked at him, incredulous. "You're dismissing me? After everything we've done together? It's not that. No, I understand perfectly, Melissa interrupted, grabbing her purse. You got what you wanted, and now you don't need me anymore, do you? Before Jack could respond, she left, slamming the door. The silence that followed was deafening. Jack walked to the window, watching the city that never sleeps. Down below, millions of lives went on, oblivious to the drama unfolding at the top of that skyscraper. His eyes landed on a photo on the shelf. Him and Hannah on their wedding day. She was beaming, and even in the photo, the love in her eyes was palpable. Jack picked up the frame, his thumb brushing over Hannah's face. "What have I done?" he murmured to himself. In the days that followed, Jack plunged even deeper into work. Endless meetings, aggressive negotiations, nights turned over in the office. He was determined to fill the emptiness he felt with more success, more money, more power. One particularly stressful afternoon, his assistant entered his office hesitantly. "Mr. Hawkins, there's a man here to see you. Says he's an old friend." Jack frowned. "I don't have old friends. Send him away." But before the assistant could respond, the door opened and a middle-aged man entered. "Jack, long time no see," exclaimed the man, smiling. Jack stared at him, confused. "Sorry, but who are you?" The man's smile faltered. "Jack, it's me, Mike. We were roommates in college, remember?" A flash of recognition passed through Jack's eyes. "Mike, what are you doing here?" "I'm in town on business and thought I'd stop by to see how you were," Mike replied, sitting down. "I heard about your success. Congratulations." Jack nodded, uncomfortable. "Thanks. How have you been?" Can't complain," Mike smiled. "Work's going well. The kids are growing up. Sarah sends her regards, by the way. How's Hannah?" The name dropped like a bomb in the office. Jack felt his stomach clench. "Hannah and we separated." Mike looked at him, surprised. "Oh, Jack, I'm sorry. You two seemed so happy together." Jack averted his gaze, unable to face the compassion in his old friend's eyes. "Things change," he said dryly. Realizing Jack's discomfort, Mike stood up. "Well, it was good to see you, Jack. If you need to talk..." "Thanks for the visit, Mike," Jack interrupted, rising to escort him to the door. When Mike left, Jack found himself again alone in his vast office. The walls, covered in awards and recognitions, seemed to mock him. That night, back in the penthouse, Jack opened a bottle of very expensive whiskey. He sat on the sofa, glass in one hand and the remote in the other. On the latest generation TV, images of his business conquests followed one another. "Jack Hawkins, the business genius," exclaimed a presenter. "The man who has everything," said another. Jack laughed bitterly, downing the contents of the glass. Everything? He had money, power, recognition. But sitting there, alone in his luxurious apartment, Jack Hawkins had never felt so empty. He got up, staggering to the balcony. Outside, the city glowed, indifferent to his pain. Jack looked out over the horizon, at the thousands of lit windows, each containing a life, a story, and for the first time in a long time, Jack Hawkins allowed himself to cry. Hannah's scream echoed through the corridors of Boston General Hospital. She clutched the hand of the nurse beside her, sweat streaming down her face, twisted in pain. "You're doing very well, Hannah," encouraged Dr. Martinez. "One more push, and your baby will be here." Hannah gathered her remaining strength, pushing with all she had. Suddenly, the room was filled with the sharp cry of a newborn. "It's a girl!" announced Dr. Martinez, lifting the baby so Hannah could see. Tears streamed down Hannah's face, mixing with sweat. "My daughter," she whispered, exhausted yet radiant. "My Sophie." As the nurses cleaned and weighed Sophie, Hannah couldn't take her eyes off her daughter. She was perfect, with a tuft of dark hair and blue eyes that reminded her of Jack. Jack. The name brought a pang of pain to Hannah's heart. He should have been here, sharing this moment. But she pushed the thought aside, focusing on the tiny life she had just brought into the world. The days that followed were a mix of joy and exhaustion. Hannah, now at home with Sophie, was discovering the challenges of being a single mother. "Shh, it's okay, my love," she murmured, rocking Sophie at 3 a.m. The baby cried incessantly, and Hannah felt completely lost. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Confused, Hannah went to the door, still cradling Sophie. "Mrs. Thompson?" An elderly lady smiled kindly. "I'm Edna, your neighbor from 3B. I heard the baby crying and thought maybe I could help." Hannah hesitated for a moment, but exhaustion spoke louder. "Please, come in," she said, grateful. Edna took Sophie into her arms with the confidence of someone who had raised many babies. In minutes, Sophie was calm, her little eyes slowly closing. "How did you do that?" Hannah asked, amazed. Edna smiled. "Years of practice, dear. I raised 5 children and helped raise 7 grandchildren. If you need help, just call." Hannah felt tears well up in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, feeling less alone for the first time in months. Weeks passed, and Hannah gradually found her rhythm as a mother. But something bothered her. Sophie seemed different, quieter than other babies, with a slightly bluish tint to her lips. Worried, Hannah made an appointment with the pediatrician. Dr. Simmons examined Sophie carefully, her face serious. "Mrs. Thompson," she finally said, "I detected a murmur in Sophie's heart. I'd like to run some additional tests." Hannah's world seemed to collapse. Is it serious?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We can't be sure yet," Dr. Simmons replied gently. "But the sooner we diagnose, the better Sophie's chances will be." The following days were a blur of tests and consultations. Finally, the diagnosis. Sophie had a congenital heart condition. "She'll need surgery," explained the cardiologist, "and constant monitoring." Hannah nodded, determined. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said, looking at Sophie, who slept peacefully in her arms. Between medical appointments and caring for Sophie, Hannah barely had time to breathe. But an idea began to form in her mind. Sitting at the kitchen table, Sophie sleeping in the crib beside her, Hannah began to sketch out a plan. She remembered her work as a teacher, the children she met who lacked access to quality education. "What if?" she murmured to herself, furiously scribbling in a notebook. The next morning, Hannah called Edna. "Edna, could you watch Sophie for a few hours? There's something I need to do." With Sophie in the reliable care of Edna, Hannah went to the town hall. Hours later, she returned home, exhausted but hopeful. "How did it go, dear?" Edna asked, handing Sophie to Hannah. Hannah smiled, kissing her daughter's forehead. "I took the first step to realizing a dream," she replied. "I'm opening a school for underprivileged children." Edna looked at her, surprised and admiring. "That's wonderful, Hannah. But are you sure you can handle this and Sophie?" Hannah looked at her daughter, feeling a determination she hadn't felt in a long time. "I have to try, Edna, for Sophie and for all the children who need a chance." In the months that followed, Hannah divided her time between caring for Sophie and planning her school. There were sleepless nights, endless meetings, and moments of doubt. But with every smile from Sophie, with every small victory, Hannah felt she was on the right path. One day, standing in front of the building that would soon become her school, Sophie nestled in her arms. Hannah felt a wave of emotion wash over her. "Look, Sophie," she whispered. "This is our new beginning, our chance to make a difference." Sophie gurgled happily, as if understanding. Hannah hugged her tightly, her heart full of love and hope for the future. There, in that moment, Hannah realized she had found her purpose. The pain of separation from Jack, The challenges of single motherhood, the concerns about Sophie's health all led her here. And she was ready to face whatever came next. "We made it, my little one," Hannah murmured to Sophie. "Together, we can do anything." Jack Hawkins's office was quiet, except for the soft hum of the air conditioner and the occasional clink of ice in his whiskey glass. 3 years had passed since Hannah had left, taking with her not only their dreams of a life together, but also a secret Jack was yet to discover. The phone rang, breaking the silence. Jack frowned, annoyed by the interruption. "Hawkins," he answered brusquely. "Mr. Hawkins." His assistant's voice sounded hesitant. "There's a call on line 2. It's about Mrs. Thompson." Jack's heart skipped a beat. Hannah. He hadn't heard that name in years. With trembling fingers, he picked up the call. "Hello? Mr. Hawkins?" A female voice, not Hannah's. "This is Dr. Martinez from Boston General Hospital. I'm calling about Sophie Thompson." Jack's breath left him. "Sophie Thompson?" "Yes, your daughter." Jack's world stopped. "My daughter?" The doctor paused, clearly surprised. "Mr. Hawkins, our records indicate that you are the father of Sophie Thompson, born 3 years ago. She needs urgent cardiac surgery and..." The doctor's words turned into a blur as Jack's mind spun. A daughter. He had a daughter. With Hannah. "Mr. Hawkins, are you there?" Jack swallowed hard. Yes, I'm listening. What does Sophie need?" As the doctor explained the details of the surgery, Jack found himself diving into memories. 5 years ago. "Jack, do you want children?" Hannah asked, nestled in his arms on the couch. Jack laughed. "Of course. I imagine a little girl with your eyes and my smile." Hannah smiled, kissing him softly. "She'll be perfect." 3.5 years ago. "Jack, I need to tell you something." Hannah started, nervous. But Jack interrupted her, checking his phone. "Sorry, love. I have an important meeting. Can we talk later?" Hannah nodded, disappointed. "Sure, later." But later never came. Weeks later, Jack would humiliate her publicly at the mall, and Hannah would leave forever. Back in the present, Jack hung up the phone, stunned. He had a daughter who was sick and needed him. With trembling hands, he picked up his personal cell phone, scrolling to find Hannah's number. He hesitated for a moment before pressing call. The call went straight to voicemail. "Hannah," he began, his voice hoarse. I just found out about Sophie. Please call me back. I need to know everything." Hanging up, Jack stood abruptly, walking to the window of his office. Outside, New York continued its frenetic pace, oblivious to the emotional earthquake that had just occurred on the 50th floor. A daughter. He murmured to himself, the reality finally settling in. I have a daughter. Jack spent the following hours in a whirlwind of emotions and activity. He instructed his team of lawyers to investigate everything about Sophie Thompson and Hannah's current whereabouts. He canceled all his meetings for the next few days, ignoring his partner's protests. Sitting in his office, Jack found himself staring at old photos on his cell phone. Hannah smiling on the beach, the two of them embraced in front of the Eiffel Tower, the happiness in her eyes on their wedding day. How did we get to this point? He wondered aloud. That night, alone in his apartment, Jack faced a difficult decision. He knew he needed to go to Boston, see Sophie, talk to Hannah. But that would mean leaving behind everything he had built in the last few years. Melissa called several times, but Jack ignored all her calls. Finally, he answered. Jack, where are you? We have that dinner with the investors tonight, Melissa said, irritation evident in her voice. Jack took a deep breath. Melissa, I can't go. Something happened. Something that changes everything. What are you talking about? Melissa asked, confused. I have a daughter, Jack said, the words still sounding strange in his ears. With Hannah. She's in Boston and I need to go there. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Finally, Melissa spoke, her voice cold. I see. And what about us, Jack? What about everything we've built together? Jack closed his eyes, guilt and confusion battling within him. I don't know, Melissa. All I know is that I need to go to Boston. I need to meet my daughter. After hanging up, Jack looked at the half-packed suitcase on his bed. In a few hours, he would be on his way to Boston, towards an uncertain future, but with one certainty. He was a father, and nothing else mattered now but meeting his daughter and making amends for the past. The taxi stopped in front of Boston General Hospital, and Jack Hawkins felt his heart race. After a tense and anxious journey, he was finally here. Somewhere inside that imposing building were Hannah and the daughter he had only learned about a few days ago. With hesitant steps, Jack crossed the hospital's entrance. The characteristic smell of the hospital hit his nostrils, bringing a wave of apprehension. He approached the information desk, ready to ask about Sophie Thompson, when something caught his eye at the corner. There she was, Hannah. She was talking to a nurse at the end of the hallway, her back to him. Her hair was shorter than Jack remembered, and there was a new tension in her shoulders. Beside her, holding her hand, was a small figure that made Jack's heart stop for a moment. Sophie, his daughter. The girl was the image of Hannah, with the same golden curls and button nose. But when she turned her face, Jack saw his own blue eyes looking around curiously. For a long moment, Jack was paralyzed, unable to move or call out to them. It was as if time had stopped, and he was trapped in that instant, watching the life he could have had, the family he didn't know existed. It was Sophie who noticed him first. Her blue eyes met his, and for a brief second, they stared at each other. The girl tugged at Hannah's sleeve, pointing in his direction. Hannah turned around, and her eyes widened in shock at the sight of Jack. A myriad of emotions crossed her face. Shock, fear, anger, and something else Jack couldn't decipher. Jack, she whispered, and even at a distance, he could see her lips forming his name. As if awakening from a trance, Jack finally found his voice and his legs. He walked toward them, his heart pounding so hard he was sure everyone in the hospital could hear it. Hannah, he said, his voice hoarse with emotion when he finally got close enough. I came as soon as I heard. Hannah instinctively pulled Sophie closer, as if to protect her. Her eyes were filled with unshed tears. How did you find out? She asked, her voice a mix of fear and defiance. The hospital called me, Jack replied, his eyes moving between Hannah and Sophie. They needed my authorization for the surgery. Hannah closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength. When she opened them again, there was a fierce determination in them. Let's talk in private, she said, glancing meaningfully at Sophie. Jack nodded, following Hannah to an empty waiting room. Sophie stayed with the nurse, her curious eyes following the adults. As soon as the door closed behind them, Hannah turned to Jack, her emotions finally overflowing. How dare you show up like this? She hissed, years of bitterness and anger in her voice. After everything that happened, you think you can just come back and... Hannah, please, Jack interrupted, his own voice trembling. I know I made terrible mistakes, but I didn't know. Why didn't you tell me about Sophie? Hannah laughed bitterly. Tell? When, Jack? When you were too busy with your meetings? Or maybe when you publicly humiliated me at that mall? Jack felt each word like a stab. I'm sorry, he said, knowing the words were inadequate. I was an idiot, but now I want to do the right thing. For Sophie, Hannah studied him for a long moment, as if trying to gauge his sincerity. Finally, she sighed, the anger giving way to weariness. Sophie has a congenital heart condition, she said softly. She needs surgery. That's why we're here." Jack felt the world spin around him. His daughter, the child he had just discovered, was seriously ill. What can we do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Hannah looked at him, surprised by his use of "we." "The doctors say the surgery has a good chance of success, but it's expensive, and the recovery will be long." Jack nodded, determination replacing the shock in his eyes. "I'll pay for everything, anything Sophie needs." For a moment, Hannah seemed about to argue, but then nodded. "Thank you," she said simply. There was a soft knock on the door, and the nurse entered with Sophie. The girl looked timidly at Jack, partially hiding behind Hannah's legs. Jack knelt down to Sophie's level. "Hello, Sophie," he said softly. I'm your dad." Sophie studied him for a moment before giving a small smile. "Hi," she said quietly. Jack felt his heart melt. He tentatively extended his hand, and after a moment of hesitation, Sophie took it. Hannah watched the scene, a complex mix of emotions on her face. Anger for Jack's years of absence, grief for the past mistakes, confusion about what his presence meant for the future. But also, buried under all those layers, a tiny spark of hope. As Jack awkwardly conversed with Sophie, asking about her favorite colors and animals, Hannah allowed herself just for a moment to imagine a different future than the one she had planned. A future where, perhaps, they could be a family. But then reality intruded, and Hannah pushed those thoughts aside. There was much to discuss, much to resolve. For now, she would focus on what was most important: Sophie's health. The rest would have to wait. In the days that followed, Jack became a constant presence at the hospital. He spent hours by Sophie's bedside, trying to make up for lost time. "What's your favorite color, Sophie?" Jack asked, holding a coloring book. "Purple," Sophie replied enthusiastically, her eyes shining. Jack smiled, handing her the purple crayon. He watched in wonder as she colored, her little face scrunched in concentration. Hannah watched them from the door, her heart torn. Seeing Jack making an effort was both comforting and painful. "We need to talk," Hannah said softly when Sophie fell asleep. In the corridor, the tension between them was palpable. "Why now, Jack?" Hannah asked, her voice laden with emotion. "Why decide to be a father now?" Jack sighed deeply. "I know I made terrible mistakes, Hannah. But when I found out about Sophie, everything changed. I want to do the right thing." Hannah nodded slowly, still cautious. Days later, Jack accompanied Hannah to the school she had founded. Walking through the colorful hallways, listening to the laughter of children, Jack felt a mix of pride and shame. "This is incredible, Hannah," he said sincerely. "You've built something wonderful here." Hannah smiled slightly, the first genuine smile Jack had seen in years. The moment was interrupted by the ringing of Jack's phone. Melissa's name flashed on the screen. "Are you not going to answer?" Hannah asked, a shadow crossing her face. Jack hesitated, then turned off the phone. "It's not important now." But the past would not stay quiet for long. The following afternoon, while Jack played with Sophie in the hospital room, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. "Jack?" Melissa's voice cut through the air like a knife. "So this is where you've been." Jack stood abruptly, his face pale. "Melissa, what are you doing here?" Melissa's eyes narrowed, flicking between Jack, Sophie, and Hannah, who had just entered the room. "I came to see for myself," Melissa said coldly. "I see you found your family." The word family sounded like an accusation. Jack felt the weight of his past choices pressing down on him. Hannah took Sophie into her arms, protective. "I think you two need to talk," she said, her voice tense. "Come on, Sophie, let's get some ice cream." As Hannah left with Sophie, Jack faced Melissa, knowing he had difficult decisions ahead. The past and present collided, and he would have to choose his future. Weeks passed, and Hannah began to notice subtle changes in Jack. He was more present, more attentive, not just to Sophie, but also to the hospital staff and the children at the school. One day, as she watched Jack reading a story to Sophie, Hannah felt something shift within her. A small spark of hope that she quickly tried to suppress. Has he really changed? She wondered silently. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of monitors beeping frantically. Sophie was having a crisis. "Sophie!" Hannah cried, rushing to the bed. Jack was already there, holding his daughter's hand while doctors and nurses flooded the room. "What's happening?" Jack asked, panic evident in his voice. "She's having a severe arrhythmia," a doctor quickly explained. "We need to stabilize her." The hours that followed were the longest in both Hannah and Jack's lives. They waited together in the waiting room, their fear uniting them in a way they hadn't felt in years. Jack took Hannah's hand, squeezing it gently. "She'll be okay," he whispered, more to himself than to Hannah. Hannah looked at their intertwined hands, a whirlwind of emotions passing through her. For the first time in a long time, she didn't pull away. Finally, the doctor came out, looking exhausted but relieved. "We've stabilized her. Sophie is out of danger for now." Relief washed over them, and without thinking, Hannah threw herself into Jack's arms. For a moment, they stayed like that, united in their concern and love for their daughter. When Hannah stepped back, there was a new vulnerability in her eyes. "Jack, But before she could finish, Melissa appeared in the corridor, her high heels echoing on the linoleum floor. "Jack, we need to talk," she said, her tone urgent. Hannah immediately pulled back, her defenses rising again. Jack looked between the two women, clearly torn. "Go," Hannah said coldly. "Sophie is stable now." Jack hesitated, but followed Melissa to a secluded corner. Hannah couldn't hear what they said, but Jack's expression grew increasingly grim. When he returned, he looked defeated. "Hannah, there's something you need to know," Melissa interrupted, her voice cutting. "Let me tell Jack. After all, I've been there all this time." What followed was a revelation of secrets and lies from Jack's past that Hannah could never have imagined. Each word was like a knife, shredding the newly rebuilt trust. Hannah felt her world crumble once again. Without a word, she turned and entered Sophie's room, closing the door behind her. Jack stood in the hallway, torn between following Hannah and dealing with the consequences of his past with Melissa. The weight of his choices had never felt so heavy. Jack stared at his reflection in the hospital bathroom mirror, the weight of his decision heavy in his eyes. He knew what he had to do. Exiting, he found Melissa in the corridor. "It's over," he said firmly. "I'm going to do the right thing, no matter the cost." Melissa looked at him with disdain. "You're throwing everything away? For them?" "No," Jack replied. "For me. For the person I want to be." Jack entered the hospital's meeting room, where the board of his company awaited via video conference. "Gentlemen," he began, "I am stepping down from the company. Furthermore, I am donating my shares to fund Hannah's school and Sophie's treatment." Chaos erupted on the screen, but Jack turned off the call. Exiting, he found Hannah. "I heard everything," she said, eyes wide. "Jack, why?" "Because some things are more important than money or power," he replied, looking at Sophie through the hospital room window. Hannah felt the last barriers in her heart crumble. "Thank you," she whispered. Months later, Sophie ran through the yard of Hannah's school, fully recovered. Jack chased after her, both laughing. Hannah watched, a smile on her lips. Jack approached, wrapping her in an embrace. "We're a family now," he said softly. Hannah nodded, finally at peace. "Yes, we are." As the sun set, the three walked home together, leaving behind the shadows of the past and embracing a future filled with love, forgiveness, and second chances. Jack looked at Hannah and Sophie, his heart overflowing with gratitude. He had paid a high price for his mistakes, but what he gained in return was priceless. Finally, he understood the true meaning of success and happiness. And there, what did you think of this emotional journey of Jack, Hannah, and Sophie? If this story touched your heart, don't forget to leave a like and share your emotions in the comments. What lesson did you take from this story of redemption? Do you have any ideas for the next story you would like to see here? Leave your suggestion! And to not miss any of our upcoming emotional narratives, subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell. Remember, just like Jack discovered, sometimes the real treasure is not in what we gain, but in what we are willing to give up for love.